Miss Dorcas Penworthy is presented as a strong-willed woman whose genuine, forbidden love for the Duke is now the reason for her midnight execution, a calculated banishment designed to ensure her ruin. If you enjoy stories like this, please support us by subscribing to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The shadows clung like cold black velvet to the corners of Darkwater Manor, a fortress of cold stone and colder hearts. The house was unnaturally silent, save for the rhythmic tick of the grandfather clock marking the final, fatal seconds. Miss Dorcas Penworthy stood in the drafty entrance hall, her simple traveling dress a stark contrast to the portraits of titled ancestors sneering down from the walls. Her face, usually pale, was illuminated by the flickering oil lamp, showing a pair of clear eyes that held an unbowed defiance, like a desperate soldier holding the line. Yet, the woman standing here was already a pariah, exiled for the unforgivable crime of loving the air. The time has come, Miss Penworthy, the Dowager Duchess's footman intoned, his voice devoid of pity, a functionary of her cruel will. At 20 years old, Dorcas had spent her short time in this household trying only to live with quiet dignity, an impossibility when her heart belonged entirely to Duke Raphael Darkwater. Raphael, who was miles away, trapped by his family's deception, unable to intervene. The Dowager Duchess's plot was a final declaration. Dorcas was an obstacle to the arranged marriage to Lady Evangeline, and this stain on their bloodline would be removed at once. The deep, heavy boom of the clock beginning to strike 12 rattled the glass panes. As the first chime died in the silence, Dorcas knew that once she stepped through those gates and into the dark, unsupervised road, her future was not just uncertain. It was finished. The dining room at Darkwater Manor had been designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings soared into shadow despite the blaze of 3 crystal chandeliers, and portraits of disapproving ancestors lined the walls like a jury of the perpetually damned. The mahogany table could seat 30. Tonight it held only 7, which somehow made the vast space feel even more oppressive. Dorcas kept her eyes on her plate, cutting her venison into precise, identical pieces she had no intention of eating. Across from her, Lady Evangeline Hartley discussed the upcoming season with Lionel in a voice like chilled champagne. Effervescent, expensive, and ultimately flavorless. Everything about Evangeline was suitable. Her impeccable lineage, her substantial dowry, her ability to discuss weather and fashion for hours without ever approaching an original thought. The Weatherby Ball will be absolutely critical, Evangeline was saying. I've already had 3 gowns commissioned. One must make the right impression. One must, Lionel agreed dryly, reaching for his wine. At the head of the table, the Dowager Duchess Cordelia presided like a general surveying a battlefield. Her black bombazine rustled with every breath, a sound Dorcas had learned to associate with impending disaster. The old woman's eyes missed nothing. Not the way Evangeline leaned too close to Lionel, not the way he subtly angled away, not the careful distance Dorcas maintained from everyone. Raphael sat to Dorcas's right, discussing church renovations with his father. He was trying too hard to sound interested, his voice slightly too loud, his gestures slightly too animated. When he reached for the salt cellar, his fingers brushed Dorcas's hand where it rested beside her plate. It lasted less than a second, a touch so brief it might have been accidental. But Dorcas felt it like a brand, and her breath caught audibly enough that Evangeline paused mid-sentence about silk rosettes. Dorcas looked up instinctively, finding Raphael's eyes already on hers. In that unguarded moment, everything showed. Longing, desperation, apology, love. The Dowager's fork clinked against porcelain with the finality of a closing trap. Dorcas, Cordelia said, her voice cutting through the conversation like a scalpel, you look quite flushed. Are you unwell? Every face turned toward her. Raphael's hand had gone rigid beside his glass. Just the warmth of the room, your grace, Dorcas managed. Nothing more. The dowager's smile was thin as a knife's edge. No, I rather think it's something quite specific indeed. The garden alcove was overgrown with climbing roses, their heavy blooms perfuming the night air with a sweetness that bordered on cloying. It was past midnight, the only hour when the estate's endless scrutiny might briefly relax its grip. Dorcas arrived first, her wrap clutched tight against the autumn chill. She shouldn't have come. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was madness, that discovery would mean ruin for them both. But Raphael's note had been desperate tonight. Please, I cannot bear another day of this charade. He materialized from the shadows like something conjured from her own fevered imagination, still in his evening clothes, cravat loosened and hair disheveled, as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Dorcas! Her name on his lips was a prayer and a curse. This has to stop, she whispered, even as he pulled her close. Your engagement will be broken. His voice was fierce against her hair. I've already begun drafting the letter to her father. Whatever consequences come, I'll face them. I won't marry Cecilia while loving you. They'll destroy you, your career, your reputation. Then let them. He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands. What good is a spotless reputation if I spend my life lying? If I stand before God every Sunday preaching truth while living a falsehood? His thumb traced her cheekbone. I love you. That's the only truth that matters. She was crying now, hopeless and helpless. When? Tomorrow. I'll speak to Lord Ashford first thing. No more delays, no more. Behind the latticework screen, half hidden by cascading jasmine, Marcus Ashford pressed himself against the stone wall and held his breath. His older brother had always been the favorite, golden, gifted, destined for greatness. But now Marcus held ammunition that would shatter that golden image into 1,000 irreparable pieces. He waited until their whispered declarations dissolved into silence, until he heard retreating footsteps on gravel. Only then did he slip away toward the house, his mind already composing the perfect report for his grandmother. The dowager would know exactly what to do with this information, and Marcus would finally step out of Raphael's interminable shadow. The summons came at 11 o'clock, delivered by Mrs. Hewitt, whose face was carefully blank in a way that communicated everything. Dorcas had been sitting by the window of her small room. Not quite servants' quarters, not quite family chambers, existing in that liminal space she'd occupied for years, watching the moon rise over the estate's manicure grounds. Her Grace requires your presence in the study, Mrs. Hewitt said. Immediately, the walk through Darkwater's corridors had never felt longer. Dorcas passed the gallery where she'd learned to walk as a child, the music room where her mother had taught her piano before the fever took her, the library where Raphael had first kissed her 3 years ago behind a volume of Augustine's Confessions. Every step felt like goodbye. The dowager's study was all dark wood and darker intentions. Cordelia sat behind her massive desk like a magistrate prepared to pass sentence, the lamplight casting her face in a plains of shadow and bone. Marcus lurked in the corner, practically vibrating with vindicated malice. Si Cordelia commended. Dorcas remained standing. I prefer not to. It wasn't a request. The old woman's voice could have frosted glass, though I suppose defiance is to be expected from someone who would seduce her own cousin under her benefactor's roof. I have seduced no one. Don't insult me with denials. Cordelia lifted a single sheet of paper. I have a detailed account of your midnight assignation, your whispered declarations of love, Raphael's promise to break his engagement. She set it down with theatrical precision. Did you truly believe you could corrupt him without consequence? Dorcas's hands clenched in her skirts. Where is Lionel? The Duke, Cordelia emphasized the title like a weapon, has been called away on urgent estate business in Yorkshire. He departed an hour ago. Quite convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The trap closed around her with audible precision. You will leave this house, Cordelia continued, her voice dropping to something almost conversational, which somehow made it worse, at midnight. You will take nothing but the clothes you're wearing. No references, no funds, no tearful farewells. She smiled without warmth. Consider it mercy. I could have you arrested for theft. I'm certain we could find something missing if we looked hard enough. The clock on the mantel began its slow march toward 12. Dorcas's hands shook as she pulled her mother's worn leather satchel from beneath the bed. 11 o'clock. 1 hour. 60 minutes to erase 23 years of existence from Darkwater Manor, as though she'd never been more than a ghost haunting its corridors. What had one pack for destitution? She folded her second dress, the gray wool that had seen better years, and added her mother's prayer book, the only inheritance she possessed. Her fingers hovered over the miniature portrait of her parents on a nightstand. Would the dowager consider that theft? Probably. She wrapped it in a handkerchief anyway and tucked it into the satchel's inner pocket. The door remained unlocked. No guards posted. Why would there be? Where could she possibly run at midnight with no money, no connections, no shelter? The dowager's cruelty was surgical in its precision. She calculated exactly how to maximize suffering while maintaining plausible deniability. She left of her own accord. Such a troubled girl. We tried to help her, but Dorcas sat on the narrow bed, satchel in her lap, and tried to think. Raphael didn't know. He'd retired to his chambers after dinner, oblivious to the verdict pronounced in the study below. Should she wait? Try to find him? Risk the dowager's wrath escalating further? Or disappear into the night like the phantom they'd always treated her as? A soft scratching at the door made her heart lurch. She opened it to find Tommy, the youngest stable boy, his freckled face pale with urgency. "Miss," he whispered, pressing a crumpled note into her hand. "From Mr. Peters, the head groom. He said you'd understand." She unfolded it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was nearly illegible, clearly written in haste. "Yorkshire business false. Duke sent on fool's errand." Peters overheard dowager telling coachman to delay, return minimum 3 days. Duke discovered deception, riding back now through night. Won't arrive before dawn earliest. Leave now. Hide. Manor grounds, old ice house, East Woods. Peters will bring food. Tommy was already backing away. "I weren't here, miss. Didn't see nothing." "Thank you," she breathed, but he'd already vanished into the darkened corridor. The clock in the hall began to chime 11:30. Dorcas looked at the note again, then at her meager satchel. Dawn was 8 hours away. Lionel was racing through the darkness, but he wouldn't arrive in time. She was alone. The inn at Harrogate was respectable enough. Clean sheets, decent ale, a stable that didn't reek of neglect. Raphael had arrived just after 10, bone-weary from 8 hours of hard riding on what was supposedly urgent estate business. Something about disputed water rights and a tenant revolt that required the Duke's immediate personal attention. Except there was no dispute. No dispute. The estate manager had looked at him with genuine confusion when Raphael appeared at his door, demanding details. "Your Grace, I sent no such message. The tenants are quite content. The harvest has been excellent this year." Raphael was still processing this when Peters burst through the inn's entrance, his face slick with sweat despite the autumn chill. The head groom had ridden like a demon to catch up, his horse lathered and trembling. "Your Grace." Peters could barely speak through his gasping breaths. He thrust a folded paper forward. "Read it. Now." The note was in Mrs. Hewitt's careful hand, but the words made Raphael's blood turn to ice. "Your Grace, the dowager has discovered everything. Miss Dorcas is being expelled at midnight with nothing. You were sent away deliberately. She has perhaps 3 hours before she's turned out onto the roads alone. God help us all. Ush. The paper crumpled in Raphael's fist. When did this happen? The summons came at 11, Your Grace. It's near midnight now. I rode straight through, killed one horse doing it. Peters's voice cracked. I am sorry. I couldn't get here faster. Raphael was already moving, shouting for the stable master. My horse. Now, in your freshest mount, I'll pay triple. Your Grace, the animal needs rest. Now, the word came out as a roar that silenced the entire inn. His hand shook as he checked the saddle, as he swung himself up. 8 hours to get here. At least 8 to get back. Probably more in darkness. Dorcas would already be gone, cast out into the night because his grandmother was a calculating monster and he'd been too blind, too naive, too stupid to see the trap closing. Move! He snarled at the horse, digging in his heels. The animal leaped forward into the darkness. Behind him, Peters mounted and followed, though they both knew the truth. They were already too late. The guards appeared at 11:45, their boots echoing through Darkwater's marble entrance hall like drum beats at an execution. Dorcas heard them before she saw them. Heavy footfalls ascending the main staircase with methodical purpose. She'd made it as far as the first floor landing, satchel clutched her chest, when they rounded the corner. 2 men she'd never seen before, hired muscle with faces like granite and hands that hung ready at their sides. Not estate workers. Not local men who might harbor sympathetic qualms about throwing a young woman into the night. These were strangers brought in specifically because they wouldn't hesitate. Miss Ashford, the taller one, said, his tone professionally empty. It's time. Above them, on the gallery overlooking the entrance hall, the Dowager Duchess materialized like a carrion bird drawn to dying prey. She gripped the balustrade with both hands, her black dress blending into the shadows until only her face remained visible, pale and triumphant. Dorcas lifted her chin and met those cold eyes directly. She would not cower, would not beg, would not give Cordelia the satisfaction of tears. I can walk unassisted, she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. Nevertheless, the guard said, moving to flank her on one side while his companion took the other, not touching her yet, but close enough that escape was impossible. They began descending, a grim processional toward the massive front doors that stood closed like the gates of hell. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall ticked loudly in the silence. 11:48, 11:49, each second falling like a stone into dark water. Somewhere in the east wing, a door opened and closed, probably a servant unable to sleep, witnessing this midnight expulsion. Dorcas wondered if any of them felt shame, if Mrs. Hewitt was watching from some hidden alcove, helpless to intervene. Stop! The Dowager's voice rang out from above. Dorcas froze on the bottom step. I want her to understand something before she leaves. The clock's mechanism whirred, preparing to chime. You were never family, Cordelia said softly, each word precise as a scalpel. You were charity, and charity has conditions. The first stroke of midnight echoed through the hall like a death knell. The gates of Darkwater Manor loomed 15 feet high, wrought iron twisted into elaborate patterns that had always seemed beautiful in daylight. Now, they looked like the bars of a cage opening to release her into something worse. The guards marched Dorcas down the gravel drive, their grip finally materializing on her arms when she'd slowed at the sight of the darkness beyond. No moon tonight, just an endless black mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Please, she heard herself whisper, hating the weakness in her voice. Just until morning. Let me wait until dawn. Orders are midnight, miss. The taller guard's voice held something that might have been regret, but his hands remained iron firm on her arm. The great clock finished its 12th chime. The sound died away in a silence, broken only by wind rustling through the estate's ancient oaks. One of the guards nodded to the gatekeeper, who began cranking the massive gates open with a grinding shriek of metal on metal. Beyond the gates, the road disappeared into darkness. Dorcas had heard the stories. Highwaymen, worse things, women who vanished and were found weeks later if they were found at all. Her breath came in short gasps now, dignity crumbling in the face of genuine terror. Right then, the second guard said, not unkindly, "Off you go." They propelled her forward. Her feet stumbled on the threshold between estate grounds and the wild road beyond. The gate stood open like jaws. Another step and she'd be through, and they'd close behind her. And, "Stop!" The roar came from the darkness of a drive behind them, accompanied by the thunder of hooves on gravel. A horse materialized from the shadows at a full gallop, foam flying from its mouth, its rider bent low over its neck. Raphael didn't slow. He aimed straight for the guards, who barely had time to release Dorcas and dive aside before horse and rider exploded between them. Raphael was off the animal before it fully stopped, stumbling slightly from exhaustion but moving with pure fury. "Touch her again," he snarled at the guards, "and I'll have you hanged for assault." The taller guard straightened, uncertain. "Your Grace, we have orders from the Dowager." "I'm the Duke of Darkwater," Raphael said, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. "And you answer to me." The guards backed away slowly, hands raised in placating gestures. The taller one's face had gone pale, finally recognizing the lethal edge in Raphael's voice. Not the scholarly vicar who discussed theology over Sunday dinners, but the Duke who commanded an estate of 5,000 souls and answered to no one save the crown. "Your Grace, we meant no disrespect," the second guard stammered. "We were hired for a job, that's all. Then consider yourselves dismissed." Raphael pulled a purse from his coat and threw it at their feet without looking. "Take that for your trouble and be gone from my lands within the hour. If I see either of you again, I'll have the magistrate issue a warrant." They scrambled for the purse and fled into the darkness beyond the gates like rats from a sinking ship. Only then did Raphael turn to face the manor. The Dowager stood in the entrance, her skeletal frame silhouetted by the lamplight spilling from the open doors. Behind her, servants had gathered, Mrs. Hewitt, the footmen, maids clutching their aprons. Marcus lurked on the staircase, his earlier triumph curdling into something resembling fear. "Raphael," Cordelia's voice carried across the distance, still attempting command. "You don't understand what I understand perfectly." He moved to Dorcas, who stood frozen between the gates, trembling with shock and cold. He stripped off his riding coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I understand that you are a cruel, manipulative woman who mistakes control for power. I understand that you sent me away on false pretenses to enact this." He gestured at the open gates, at Dorcas's single pathetic satchel, this monstrous cruelty. "She seduced you. She's a scheming. She's my future duchess." The words rang out like a proclamation, echoing off Darkwater's stone facade. "The woman I intend to marry. And if any person in this household, any person raises a hand against her again, they will answer to me personally." He turned his back on his grandmother's strangled gasp of outrage and lifted Dorcas onto his exhausted horse with surprising gentleness. He swung up behind her, one arm wrapping protectively around her waist. "Where are we going?" she whispered. "Anywhere but here." He urged the horse forward, leaving the gates, the guards, and the horrified faces behind. "Anywhere you want." The hunting lodge appeared through morning mist like something from a fever dream. Small, sturdy, blessedly warm. Raphael had ridden through the night until his horse could go no further, until Dorcas had fallen asleep against his chest from sheer exhaustion, until the eastern sky began its slow bleed into dawn. He carried her inside and built up the fire while she sat wrapped in blankets, watching him with eyes too large in her pale face. When he finally sat beside her, neither spoke for a long moment. "I've ruined you," she said finally. "No." He took her hand, studying the familiar lines of her palm as though they contained scripture. "I've saved myself from a life of cold duty and colder marriage, from becoming my grandmother." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "Will you marry me? Not because society demands it, not because your honor requires it, but because I love you and cannot imagine drawing another breath without you." The vicar arrived at noon, an old family friend who asked no questions and recorded the marriage in his personal register before any scandal could reach his ears. There were no flowers, no music, no witnesses beyond the lodge keeper's wife. Just two people speaking vows that meant everything because they chose them freely. 7 years later, the Dowager Duchess's letter sat on Dorcas's desk like a white flag of surrender. Perhaps we might discuss reconciliation. For the sake of the family, for Raphael's heir. Dorcas touched her swelling belly absently and looked out over Darkwater's grounds. They'd returned 3 years ago, after Cordelia's power had finally waned and the old woman had retreated to the dower house. The estate had transformed under their care, more than just land management, but genuine reform. Housing for workers, fair wages, a school. "Shall I send a response?" Raphael asked from the doorway. Their daughter, Eleanor, balanced on his hip. Dorcas considered the letter, remembering the girl who'd been dragged to those gates with nothing. Remembering the midnight that had nearly destroyed her, but instead had forged something unbreakable. "Tell her she's welcome to tea," Dorcas said finally. "But she addresses me as Your Grace, and she apologizes. Properly." Raphael's smile was fierce with pride. As the Duchess commands. She was no longer the girl made of shadows and charity. She was sovereign in her own right, and mercy, like everything else worth having, would be given on her terms. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I know you enjoyed it. And if you want to enjoy more beautiful stories like this, please like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for your support. See you on the next one.